Good. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third edition of the People Agenda Report. I believe that we have many hundreds of people tuned in from around the world, from America to Australia, and countries in between. So thank you all for joining us and welcome. The People Agenda Report has been created to give a global data-driven analysis of the attitudes and behaviours across the sports industry employee market. It is considered by many as the definitive annual temperature check to help those running businesses make better and more informed decisions around their HR strategy and how to attract and retain the best possible talent. So very excited about what we're going to be discussing today over the next hour. The format is going to be reasonably simple. For those that have been here before will know what that looks like. I'll introduce you to our guests. We'll discuss some of the key features of the report over the next sort of 40 minutes, and then I'd like to have some Q&As, some questions, and we'll try and give you some answers over what we think is happening in the market over the last 12 months, and maybe a view of what's going to happen in the future. Before we go into the report, I'd just like to share a few thoughts and set the scene. The report has evolved from previous years. So this report is based on our own proprietary data sets on the global sports industry employment market. And I'd like just to thank our data and insights team for pulling all this together, which is no mean feat, as you can imagine. The annual People Agenda survey that has provided insights gained from speaking to over 600 people around the world. I think 89 nationalities were involved and 93 different countries. So it really is a truly international report that affects everybody across the sports industry. And of course, other information has come from our year-round counsel from our clients who benefit from the data and help make better informed decisions as they navigate the new world. This year actually includes a new metric. It's called the Global Sports Career Health Indicator and provides an annual measurable view on the most important factors in creating a thriving workforce. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. I don't want to go through the whole report. That's going to take too long, but we will just pick out a few of the key initiatives and ideas that have come from it. And those that are clearly watching the webinar or who have registered will receive a copy, I think pretty much straight after this. That's the plan. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the panelists. Unfortunately, we are what's called a lady down. Unfortunately, Kat McCready, who was due to join us today, is a victim of the rail chaos and is stuck somewhere between Devon and London. So our thoughts are with her. I think she felt that she could probably have travelled to New York and back by the time that she'd been on that train. So apologies there. So there's two of us, or three of us, I should say, two informed speakers. I'd like to extend my warm welcome and our gratitude for taking time out of their busy schedule. So thank you both to Rob Clark and Lee Rohem. Rob, if I could ask you to start, it'd be great if you could just introduce yourself or share some thoughts from your perspective over the last year and what you've seen in the market.
Cool. Thanks very much, Will. Hi, everybody. My name's Rob Clark. I'm an advisor and a consultant working in sport and major events. I've been doing that for the last 15 years. During that time, I've actually worked in 3 organising committees of major multi-sport events from start to finish. That's where most of my experience has been. In the process of doing that, I've had the chance to live and work internationally across Europe, Middle East and Asia. In terms of my current activities, I'm a non-exec of World Athletics and I actually spend most of my time currently working with the International Olympic Committee as their advisor on people management for future host cities. So what that means, I spend a lot of time talking with the teams in Paris, Summer Olympics 24, Milano Cortina 26, the Winter Games, Los Angeles 28 Summer Games, and now also Brisbane 2032 Summer Olympics. I guess the headlines for me would be, I think the last few years has been seeing some fairly fundamental changes, obviously largely driven by global pandemic impact on the sport world, and essentially largely a shutdown of major events and sport for a period of time. That also resulted in quite fundamental changes in ways of working. So both in organising committees that obviously had to continue their preparations for future games, but also in areas like federations. So I think it's been very fundamental, and I think it's going to be super interesting today to see some of the insights from the survey, and I guess add some additional reflections from ourselves.
Thank you, Rob. A very interesting background, and looking forward to hearing your insights into some of these findings. Lee, love to hear your background and your thoughts.
Thanks, Will, and yeah, delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So yeah, I'm Lee Roden. I'm the head of HR for the FA. That's the English Football Association. I've been there for about 7 years. Prior to that, worked in 2 organising committees. One I had the pleasure of working with Rob Clark on the London 2012 Olympics for a few years. It was a great experience. Also worked on Rugby World Cup 2015. So my remit at the FA is I look after the resourcing and talent, learning and development, internal comms and engagement, and parts of the EDI agenda. So yeah, that's what I'm responsible for. And the FA, people, hopefully most people have heard of the FA, but just to sort of explain a bit about what we do. We're a national governing body. We're not for profit. We're about 900 people. We're responsible for running competitions, the most famous of which are the Women's and Men's FA Cup. We've probably heard of those, but numerous other competitions as well. We facilitate and develop the national grassroots game. We also run our over 20 national teams, including our senior women's and men's, our development teams, and our para squads. We regulate, administrate the game. We also responsible for running 2, what we like to think of world-class venues in Wembley Stadium, but also our National Football Centre up at St George's Park. And contrary to popular belief, we are key stakeholders in, but we do not manage or run the Premier League or the English Football League. So yeah, that's what we're about. And yeah, for the focus of the last year, very different last year, I think, to ones that we've had previously. Lots of change, lots of stuff that you're going to see through the people agenda, lots of insights that are going to be relevant, and certainly were relevant to us, things that resonated with me, things around the fact that people are looking for something different, that we're grappling with hybrid working in an organisation which has very different and very diverse workforce. So, you know, for example, we'll get into this a bit later, I'm sure, but we've got some people that can work pretty remotely, and you know, their work naturally fits with that sort of style of doing things. We've also got people that work on our grounds team, for example. And if you're looking after the pitch at Wembley, you can't really, mowing your own lawn at home is not really working from home. You got to be there. You got to be on the pitch. And to be fair, those guys really want to be doing that. So yeah, so navigating that, we're about coming up for our first anniversary of working in a hybrid way, and it's been really interesting to see. You know, sport, many of you will know, is very cyclical. Football, particularly. So we think we have to go through a few cycles to really see what it's about. But yeah, we're definitely seeing that people are wanting something different. People's habits, their desires have definitely changed over the last year. And we're going to explore some of those things, I think, over the next sort of 50 minutes or so.
Thank you, Lee. Fascinating. I'm really looking forward to this. So without further ado, I'm going to shift to the next slide. And this sort of gives you a bit of a methodology on how we've achieved this. And I've mentioned earlier about the insights that have been pulled from various different sources. But this just gives you an indication of how broad this report has been. You know, despite popular thought, Europe is actually only 51% of the people agenda, and there's not evenly spread, but you know, a good representation of most continents around the world, which is good. The gender split has always been a challenge within the sports industry, one that I think more than ever before is being addressed, but there is still a sort of a 30-70 type split in gender, with a 1% non-binary and 1% other. The majority of the audiences you would expect is sort of 20 and above, 26% being sort of mid to late 20s, mid 20s to mid 30s, and then going upwards from there. The average salary is actually in here. That just indicates the sort of level of person that we are attracting using this methodology, which I would say is probably a mid-level type candidate. Again, you'll see that a lot of the audience, over a quarter of the audience, have come from the federation and major event market, and the clubs and teams and venues market is probably the second largest market that we have attracted people to in filling this, in completing this survey. Looking a little bit more at the employment status, clearly that will have an impact on how people respond if they are securely in a job versus not in a job and have been looking for some time. Their state of mind will be quite different in terms of how they participate in this survey. So it's important just to reflect on what their employment status is. 41% of the audience were currently employed and not actively looking for a job, whereas 35% were clearly employed and actively searching for a job. So there's 76%, so 3/4 of the market that were surveyed were actually engaged or actively employed in the marketplace, which again I think gives a good representation, or you get good responses based on that state of mind. Ethnicity, this clearly, you know, is a major topic in all industries, and sport is no exception. And 63% of our audience would class themselves as white Caucasian, with sort of 37% of other ethnic background. So, you know, again, I'd like to see some greater parity in that, as well as the gender field in due course, and that's certainly something that we as a representative of the people agenda would like to encourage for next year, and I'm sure the industry as a whole would like that as well, given the proactive nature that a lot of organizations are taking in terms of addressing their equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. So interesting just to get a flavor of the methodology and where these people have come from. Rob or Lee, any sort of standout thoughts from that slide that sort of taking you by surprise, or is it sort of consistent with your understanding or your view on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I'd jump in first. I think it's quite interesting on the gender piece. Obviously, my experience is primarily with organising committees and federations. I'd certainly say in the case of organising committees, actually, one of the things I like about them is essentially they're new organisations that are set up to organise the stadium games, and as a result, they have a kind of blank piece of paper. So often, what you'll find is actually the people in those organisations are actually very diverse. So I would say that most organising committees actually have much more balance in terms of gender and other diversity characteristics as well. And I think that actually is, when you've worked within them, when you see the impact that has on performance, it's marked, and it's something you really carry with you wherever you go. And I think the reality is they have the opportunity to recruit, frankly, just the best. And therefore they tend to search in the most diverse pools to give themselves the best chance of hiring the best.
Okay.
I think the flip side might be federations, where I think certainly on an international level, historically, they've not been as diverse. But I certainly know it from a World Athletics perspective, there's a very significant push now to address this. And for example, in terms of gender, World Athletics is moving to a position now where for all its commissions and tribunals and panels, the bodies that really shape strategy and policy across World Athletics, we're looking for a minimum of 40% of each gender. So we go through a process on a cyclical basis, and we're talking about hundreds of appointments over a 4-year cycle. So actually making a very strong statement there of intent in terms of wanting to address that gender diversity issue. We also, obviously, because of the nature of World Athletics being a global federation, is we also ensure representation from all of the geographical areas. So in terms of Asia, South America, North America, Africa, etc., and the Pacific. So again, I think it's changing. I think it needs to keep changing. I think World Athletics is probably a bit at the forefront of other federations. But yeah, I think organising committees generally much more diverse organisations than federations, but I think federations are starting to address the issue now.
Yeah, and the nature of that is it's a rapid build, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so you're basically a startup.
Yeah.
So obviously, clearly, that's that advantage in terms of really shaping your strategy.
Makes sense. Lee, any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, just to echo, I was thinking exactly the same as Rob was just saying. When you start an organising committee and you build it from scratch, you create your own blueprint, kind of do what you want. Federations and governing bodies, they already exist as an entity, as a mass. So yeah, for example, on gender, we've done lots of work on gender. Our exec committee is now 50% female. Certainly wasn't that way 10 years ago. But they're hard fought and they're hard won, and we're almost 40% female now in terms of our overall workforce, but that's been a hard journey over 6 years. Not because there aren't amazingly talented people out there, but you're not starting from scratch. So you're working with the turnover that you've got and sort of changing minds about making the FA, for example, where I work at the moment, more appealing. So yeah, not really surprised about those, but yeah, quite different depending on what sort of bit of sport you work in, I guess.
Yeah, and the FA have invested from an ethnicity perspective. They've invested heavily in the football leadership diversity code, haven't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how's that going?
Yeah, really successful. We've got a lot of movement that first year. Lots of people have signed up. Working with you guys, Will, with a fantastic jobs platform that we've got, which is incredibly well used, much more than we thought. But yeah, we're numerous initiatives to improve the diversity, ethnic diversity in sport within our workforce and within participation. And it's a long journey, but it's going well.
Good, thank you, Lee. I think what we'll move on to the next slide, and I mentioned earlier about the career health indicators, and I just sort of want to spend a little bit of time just explaining what this is really. And we put this together to highlight the primary areas that we feel that the employers need to focus on and invest in to ensure that their employees thrive as they strive to attract the best possible talent. It is a new concept. It hasn't been shared or created previously, but ultimately its vision is to create a greater investment in people. I think one of my challenges over the last 20 years that I've been in the sports industry, representing both people on the pitch and theoretically people off the pitch, I don't think a day goes by where someone somewhere tells me how important people are and that people are their biggest asset, yet metaphorically speaking, the next day they don't necessarily act on those words or on that phrase. So I think what has happened over the last 3 or 4 years you have this sort of pre-COVID and this post-COVID world. The post-COVID world, I think, has seen some significant challenges and changes to the market, some of which I think are very positive, some of which are more challenging for organizations to deal with. But I think this career health indicator concept is really to help people understand where they can start to invest more resource and energy into attracting the right people and growing the industry for the sake of the industry rather than just themselves. The 6 indicators were chosen following an analysis of the sports industry, as you can see, and how well the sports industry has delivered in each of these areas over the last 12 months is measured using anonymized and globally representative global sports data. So we've got 4 indicators that reflect attitudinal, which is how sports professionals are developing and able to operate, with 2 of the factors being what we call macro. So the global pool of talent who come into sport shows that the emphasis from sports organizations needs to lean towards the opportunity they provide rather than the talent that they attract. A lot of this report is based upon these 6 indicators, which you will see once everybody receives the report. I don't want to focus on each and every one of them. I think it will be too laborious, and clearly we don't have a lot of time. But there are 2 or 3 key areas that I think I'd like to dig deeper into, and we'll go into that in a second. The plan here is, once we've gone into 2 or 3 of these indicators, I'll then share with you a broader picture of what we feel are the 7 key takeouts of the report itself, or the 7 key findings. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that and just get people's perspective. So we'll also show you what we feel from the data that we've collected, what the score is this year of the career health indicator, i.e. where we are good in the market in terms of various indicators and where we are less good in terms of the various indicators. I think a lot of it is pretty much obvious to some organizations that have been in this market for a period of time, but there are certainly some surprises as well. So I think if we can sort of kick straight off, I think one of the first factors that this report has demonstrated is company values. And company values, as you can see, as one of the attitudinal indicators, has become one of the #1 employee considerations as for organizations in the sports industry. So I just want to sort of share some thoughts here. I think, as we were saying earlier, or as I was saying earlier, the industries have navigated some seismic change in the past few years, from a pandemic to financial instability and political unrest in certain parts of our country, but also everywhere else. And this has clearly created irrevocable change. If we could start with Lee, I know the FA has very strong company values, or has instilled very strong company values, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years since your new CEO has been appointed. Can you share with us your thoughts and your view on how company values have become one of the #1 considerations for you?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we've noticed over several years have become more and more important to people. And we know that because, first of all, we see that at the recruitment stage. We also see it from people in our organization when we do internal, like most organizations, we do internal kind of culture surveys, employee satisfaction surveys. So we know it's important for people. They don't just come to work for their pay and for the job and the location. They come to work because they care about what it is that we do. And one of the things that we found, and the biggest challenges that we had, is that certainly in the UK, the FA is pretty well known. We're in the headlines quite a lot, but always for the right reasons. So people form an opinion about football, about the FA, and therefore what it's like to work at the FA. And most of those, when we did the research, were wrong. Certainly talking to people that are newly appointed to the FA, they're quite surprised about what we're all about. So working with the resourcing team, which is led by a fantastic guy called Manny Neville. I think he's actually on the one of the delegates today. We did a piece of work on our EVP, our employee value proposition, to find out what people thought, to find out what it was that people were interested about working in football. And we've done an awful lot of work to sort of educate people and to recruit and advertise and appeal to the widest possible pool through recruitment channels, through doing this education piece, through changing our website. So we are appealing, it's working. We are appealing to a broader range of people. I'm talking about our story as well. So but rather than everybody else telling our story and what you read in the headlines, we're telling our story. So we're talking about, our current 4-year strategy, we're about halfway through, is all about kind of the impact, the positive impact that we have on the communities we serve. And given the millions of people that play football every week in the UK, that's a lot of people. So there's a lot of change that can be affected, no matter what job you do at the FA. Whether that's about improving the pitches, 5,000 pitches we're aiming to deliver. Because if we can't play poor quality pitches, means that people can't play football because games are called off with bad weather. To doubling participation, that's already happening in the women's game, around spectators and the number of people playing. That's an incredible achievement that the FA has achieved over just over the last 5 years. One of our objectives is to win a major tournament. It was a long time coming, but we hopefully some of you noticed that we did that last year with the Women's Euros in quite spectacular fashion, I would like to say. We're all very proud of that. But it isn't just about winning tournaments. It's about what we do on a daily basis, what we do for the grassroots team. One of the things that we noticed, and I will finish here because there's a lot I could talk about. But when I first joined the FA, it was around the 2016 Euro tournament where we crashed out. You might remember, to Iceland. It was a terrible performance. We were absolutely ripped to shreds in the press. Many of you would say quite rightly. And my boss and I, so Rachel Brace, the HR director, we thought, goodness me, we're going to have an absolutely terrible time. Everyone's going to be absolutely decimated. Workforce morale's going to be absolutely flat, be awful. And actually it wasn't. We found out quite early on, we'd only just joined the FA, that the workforce is pretty resilient. And they know about all the other great things we do, whether we win a tournament and the headline grabbing stuff or not, there's amazing stuff that we do. So we kind of knew almost instantly that the purpose and what we do in the organization is important, but it's become even more important. Where you just said quite rightly, even the last few years, I think when we look back, and when I first started at the FA in 2016, we hadn't had Brexit, we hadn't had, climate change wasn't such a big deal, we hadn't had movements like Black Lives Matter, like the Me Too movement, COVID hadn't happened. Some incredible things have changed our society over the last 5-6 years, but particularly over the last 2. So we know that what's important to people is different to maybe what historically was.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Sorry, Robert. I know for some reason I've got an echo. It's fascinating, and I was in Birmingham this weekend, just gone, with the athletics. I was having a chat with the championship director of the World Indoor Athletics, and he was saying that the importance and value that sport, major events can bring to a city, in this case it's Glasgow, I think in 2024, then he was building a narrative to just showcase how valuable sport can be in driving societal change. And you were just talking about the impact that, or actually the lack of impact that winning or losing the 2016 match to Iceland had. It wasn't actually as impactful as you originally had anticipated. And Stuart from World Indoors was talking about how he is creating this environment where, from a local and national perspective, he is is creating significant change around social impact and other areas. So we mustn't underestimate the value that, whilst it's not just about, it is about people, it's not just about the people that we employ, but it's about the impact that we can have on people through the power of sport. Rob, company values have become the #1 employee consideration. What's your view on that?
Yeah, and again, it's something that's, I think, particularly relevant for organising committees, and apologies people that may have worked in organising committees, but just to restate, these are basically temporary organisations. They typically exist for 3 to 7 years, perhaps. They therefore have no history about how stuff gets done, and they have no future in the sense that they cease to exist once the games are completed. And they're essentially very complex organisations that involve many different organisations, of which the organising committee sits at the heart. But they'll be working with government, they'll be working with delivery partners like transport operators, they'll be working with service providers like hospitality, catering, etc. They'll be working with venue owners. So actually, the thing that is, if you like, the glue that can hold all this together in a temporary environment is really around purpose and values. And so, and this is very real for us. So when a new host city gets appointed to host the Olympics, the first conversation we have with the CEO and the leadership team is about purpose and values. Because we know from our experiences that they're absolutely fundamental to shaping the culture and the decision-making and the activity of this temporary organisation. So yeah, absolutely fundamental and central certainly in organising committees.
Okay, interesting. And I probably wasn't clear earlier when I talked about questions and answers at the end. There are a number of different questions flying around at the moment, and I'm going to try and bring some of those in in a timely manner. And I think this is a timely question that has just been raised, and it does, I think, sit at the heart of company values, and actually challenges some of the other issues that we raised on the slide previously around equality, diversity, and inclusion. And a question from an anonymous attendee: should sport organisations only use recruitment firms that have 100% EDI lead recruitment processes? Evidence shows that diverse talent won't bother applying for roles if they believe they won't be treated fairly. We all know that conventional hiring is full of bias and detracts from hiring great diverse talent. Lee, could I ask you for a view on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually, and I totally agree. I totally agree. We would only ever choose, and I'm talking on behalf of Manny's. I know Manny, who I mentioned before, is probably on the delegate list. Can't answer this, but I hope he'll approve of my answer here. Manny chooses and selects only the very best partners to work with. We don't have thousands of roles every year. We do have hundreds. We don't have thousands, and lots of those we do direct. So where we work with partners, we make sure that we work with partners that can provide us those services, and that have a proven track record of doing that well. We mandate diverse shortlists. We've got a number of things that we do as part of our EDI plan, a 3-year EDI plan, and we certainly work hard with our partners to make sure that we get what we want, and people that can reach diverse candidates is absolutely critical. Yeah, there's no question that you should be choosy about who you work with and who you partner with.
Makes sense. Rob, you were talking earlier a little bit more about how major events have a slightly different challenge to established organizations, and some of the ED&I measurements are less of a challenge. Given your roles, not only currently but previously, what's your perspective on this?
I kind of agree with what Liz just said, to be honest with you. I think absolutely the same would hold true for organising committees. For example, I guess the advantage they've got is they're starting from zero. They're starting, they can go out to tender for partners and specify that in terms of their selection criteria for the agencies they work with. Organising committees will often search for a sponsor to help with their recruitment activities. And again, the organising committee has the opportunity to build into their selection criteria their requirements in that space. But I think they absolutely should be doing everything that Lee just mentioned there before, because I think the reality is that you have to work hard in the space. You need budget, you need resources, you need focus. I think the major recruitment agencies are generally getting better, but I've certainly found, say, an executive search where actually the relationships with candidates are super important in the network, is that agencies that haven't been doing this until recently are falling behind. So there are specialist agencies out there that have been working on this for a decade or more, and they clearly have an advantage in terms of their access to more diverse networks that they have relationships with. So I think it's a case of not just going with the same old usual agencies and companies, is actually to search more broadly for companies that have really been focused on this for a long time, because it takes time and effort and relationships.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous attendee. It's a good question. I'm just going to keep moving on. There we go. Sorry, this is the second topic that I wanted to pull out from this report, is that nearly half of new hires have come from outside of sport. Now, I think this is a really divisive statement, to be fair. I think from my experiences, the majority of organisations would absolutely support this statement, that there needs to be more people coming from outside of sport, particularly in functional areas. I think that organisations don't necessarily, the actions of organisations don't necessarily support the opportunity for new hires from outside of sport. But as I mentioned earlier, I think the landscape has changed significantly and continues to change in this sort of post-COVID world. And I think, to me, this is a very exciting statement and fact that has come out from this report, because the more people from outside of sport that we can bring in that deliver more professionalism, more structure, more process, I think will help the sports industry continue to grow, evolve, and become more professional. Equally, I also recognize that some of these skills or functional skills are challenged in an industry that doesn't necessarily operate like other more conventional industries. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword. There are the marketplace is littered with people that have been hugely successful in making that transition, and also littered with people that have not been able to make that transition. But the evidence suggests that 42% of new hires have come from outside of sport, and 33% of those are at senior level, which again raises or generates a new question. So very interesting piece of data and an interesting finding. I'm going to go back to you, Lee, if I may, just to give your perspective and point of view on both elements, really. One being outside sport, and secondly, a third of those being at senior level.
Yeah, this is a really interesting piece of data. It's something that we've been necessarily been doing more of. I talked about the work that we've done on our EVP to appeal to a broader base. We know that in sport, some roles, some of the talent pools that we were looking in, that if they're historically underrepresenting diverse talent, we're not going to find what we're looking for when we've set targets around the diversity that we're looking for. So we've had to look outside sport. And for many of our roles, it's good actually that people do bring in a new perspective, as you said, Will, sometimes it's a level of professionalism. That's not to say that people that work within sport aren't professional, but a new blend, it has been really beneficial to us in the transformation that we've been on since sort of 2015. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting stat. I mean, I worked for 20 years in retail. I never thought I'd end up with a career in sport, and then you get that call one day to say, do you fancy coming to interview for a role? And it was, for me, it was the London 2012 Olympics, and I had no sport experience, but I did have volume recruitment experience. I'd just come from being the head of resourcing at Sainsbury's, so I knew a thing or two about volume recruitment, and I applied that to the, and we had a great time at the London 2012 Olympics with the games makers. So I was really lucky. I know sometimes it's just that people looking at something different, and that's one of the challenges that we've had with our line managers, is saying, okay, you've got a vacancy. I don't know, I'm not going to use an example because it wouldn't be fair, but they want to look at, there's about 5 people that do this particular role in the whole of the UK, but they're all pretty similar. So if you want to get something different, if you want a different outcome, you've got to look differently. So working and convincing line managers to maybe look at a different set of criteria, to look at things in a different way, to perhaps take a bit longer if the first round of recruitment doesn't bring back what you're looking for. Don't stress higher, work a bit longer, do some more work, look outside of the industry for some of the roles. So yeah, I think this is a great thing. And also, as many of our sectors are expanding, we have to go outside of sport to look at for new things. And there are some roles that we do need to look in sport. If you're working in our technical division, you probably need to know a thing or two about football or coaching, or have certain qualifications. But for some of the functional areas, we've definitely had great success in looking outside sport. This is a really encouraging number.
And Lee, just one of the challenges I think that the sports industry faces is how to attract new faces to the industry. Now, as we will see in due course, we aren't particularly, as an industry, we aren't particularly good payers. I think we have some very good positive elements to the hiring, or to the broader HR piece, or the indicators, as we will see. But actually, how do you go out to the non-traditional sports industry market and actually attract that non-sports talent?
I think it goes back to the first point about you being really clear about what we stand for and what you can achieve. Yeah, you're probably going to earn, depending on the industry that you come from, you could probably earn some more money somewhere else. We pay well at the FA, but we're not an investment bank. Some people could definitely be earning more money, and we've attracted some of our senior leaders in, definitely with a remuneration package that maybe not even what they're on, but they care so much about what they can do. And it sounds a bit lofty, but it really does make a difference for people. Sport, there's something around the sort of the higher order purpose about what we do, about the ability to make social change. So yeah, definitely people do come for the same money. Sometimes in the very senior positions, they come for less money. It's important to pay fairly, of course it is. But I think it's about being really clear about what you stand for and what you can do to make change. And I guess bring people on the journey. We're definitely on a journey. I think most organizations are, particularly at the moment. We've talked about this we're in the context of rapid change societally. So we're all on a bit of a journey, but encouraging people that want to be part of that have got the energy and the values to share what you're doing. But it's a very, very much a hearts and minds piece, and you've got to do a lot of work to get out there to see some different people, and you've also got to convince your existing hiring teams to look and to be a bit bold sometimes and make some different decisions.
Get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. Rob, from a major event perspective, and I don't want to pigeonhole this too much for you, but clearly, we talk about rapid growth, startup mentality. You don't have as much of a luxury.
No, but I think the transferable piece of what Lee just said is about the message about impact, social value and purpose, because I think certainly for Gen Z, Gen Y, that certainly resonates in terms of attracting people going forward. I think this 42% number is just going to grow and grow, because I think people realize that in terms of attracting the best talent, more diverse talent, there's an awful lot outside the world of sport. And this really gets illustrated in organising committees. I'd say typically, of all the people that end up working in an organising committee, 90% will never have done it before. 90%. Of all the jobs in an organising committee, 85%-ish have nothing to do with sport generally. They're about logistics, transport, other areas. And therefore, that almost like forces you, if that makes sense, to look for talent in parallel sectors, whether it's telecoms, retail, whatever it might be. And I think in the process of doing that, you realize about actually attracting the best talent, giving yourself the best chance of picking the best people, is to go look in some of those adjacent sectors. I think it's going to, in terms of federations, I think it'll happen. It'll be a slower process for the reasons that Lee says. I think there's quite a big push in terms of the governance of federations, because I think they can move faster with areas like non-exec roles. So I know there's quite a big push in terms of diversification of non-exec talent and talent from outside the world of sport, and I think that will continue as well. But I think this 42% number is just going to grow and grow for the next few years.
Very interesting. Thank you, Rob. I'm conscious of time, and I'm not managing this these slides very well. This is a very not divisive issue, but a very hot topic, as you can imagine. And employers aren't in sync with employees around hybrid working. Again, I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to go too deeply into this, but I do think it's important just to recognize how valuable and how much noise that this topic is creating. 70% of the sports industry professionals cite hybrid working as their preferred working practice, yet 57% are currently going into the office 4 or 5 days a week. Lee, I think you mentioned earlier, this is your almost 1 year anniversary of your hybrid working strategy. Just share with us sort of what's happening in your world around this space.
Yeah, sort of briefly, we did a lot of work, like most organisations did through lockdown, about how we were going to come out of lockdown when it eventually happened. We had a big working group across representatives from every one of our divisions and our senior team, and we decided that we would go back minimum of 2 days a week into our places of work. For some people, whether their role is very operational, they're back sort of full time. They want to be back full time. That's what their job is. Some people are doing more than 2 days. It's a minimum. We have the luxury of, we work in Wembley Stadium and in St George's Park. We haven't had to shrink any of our office space like some organisations have. So there's a desk for everybody. So if people want to work 5 days a week in the office, they can. Some people do more than that. It's working well. 1 year on, it's working pretty well. People have got to that rhythm of, actually, they'll talk to each other. They've got rhythms of days that they do, so people know when they're in. I think people worked out pretty quickly that if they're going in on a day where there's not many other people and they're sat at their desk on their own doing Teams meeting with people somewhere else, it probably isn't worth being in the office. And that's an obvious point. It took us a while to figure that out. So people are pretty good at saying, are you in the office next Tuesday? Okay, great, let's get together and have a meeting face to face. So we've got a critical mass of doing that, but we're also giving people the benefit of working remotely. We know it's one of the questions that gets asked at every single recruitment conversation about what our policy is, and when it's really important for us that we've got a hybrid policy. We would definitely be losing talent, I think, if we didn't, and we know it's important to people's values have changed. So yeah, we're hybrid, and I think it's going to stay that way. We're still under trial. We haven't changed any contracts, as most haven't. We've got a few cycles to get through before we see where we really land, but it seems to be working well at the moment.
I think from my experience in the last probably last 6 months, this concept has settled down a bit. I think a year ago it was everyone was going, what should we be doing? How should we be doing it? What's right? What's wrong? And actually, inevitably, when there is change, there is always consternation. Or people are always panicking about what the right approach is. And the reality is that there probably isn't a right approach. One size fits all. It really does depend on many different factors, and whatever that is today is not necessarily what it is tomorrow. Type concept. Rob, in a rapid startup where people don't have as much intrinsic knowledge of the role that they're going to start, working from home seems a bit ridiculous because of the osmosis of knowledge. But share with me what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I think from an organising committee perspective, hybrid working in terms of the employees of the organising committee is incredibly challenging for all the reasons you just said there. You're a startup, fast moving, it's highly integrated. You need to collaborate, work at pace, etc. It's much easier to do that if you're kind of in the same place most of the time.
Yeah.
I think where it has shifted is, I said before about organising committees tend to work with a range of partners, delivery partners, venue partners, etc. And you are seeing the adoption of technology to make that more efficient. So, for example, you're now starting to see virtual venue planning taking place. So historically, stakeholders would all get on planes, fly to a country, spend a week in an office working it through. Now, a lot of those things can be done using virtual technology, of mock-ups of venues to work with stakeholders, etc., to work those through. And I think the other thing is much more globalization of access to expertise. And again, in terms of that's like 2 years ago, we would tend to fly to cities, spend a week in the host city, work with them. Now, every week, it's generally more online meetings and virtual relationships where you've got those relationships established. So it is a bit of a mixture for organising committees, but within them, for their employees, extremely challenging to adopt a significant degree of hybrid working. Federations, slightly differently. I think you've got established organisations, established relationships. Frankly, they realised during lockdown, when budgets were slashed because events weren't happening, they had to cut costs, and they rapidly adopted more hybrid and virtual ways of working with their member federations, and frankly saved millions of pounds on travel and expenses, and actually a much more sustainable model as well for them going forward. So I think in a very positive way for international federations.
Thank you, Rob. Good view or good thoughts there. I am struggling slightly to move this on. So, conscious of time, we've got about sort of 7 or 8 minutes left, and I wanted to put this on the table. This is the career health indicators, and as we said earlier, it's what we see as the benchmark for future years. And our hope and our belief is that the collective investment in people will see more sports industry talent develop further and faster and further, I guess, in the next 12 months. And this score gives us an empirical benchmark to judge that on. As we've heard and as we've been seeing, company purpose in the sports industry seems to be quite a high value, high value indicator or sense of purpose that we are all interjecting with our business. And I think that's 70 out of 100 in the first year is fantastic. But we also can see that as an industry, financial reward needs to be looked at or needs to be worked on. Diversity needs to be worked on. Whereas fresh perspectives, work environment, and career confidence is more sort of in and around the midpoint or just higher. Lee, from your perspective, is this a surprise? Is there anything here that you think actually, I think we are better or worse than this scale would indicate?
No, I think Yeah, there's areas I think that they need more work that I'm not surprised to see around sort of talent diversity. I know everybody is working hard at that at the moment, and people are on a journey, and it's not a quick or easy thing to do. I think financial reward, that's an interesting one. Again, I think you probably see that on most surveys, if I'm honest, through whatever industry I've ever worked in. Nobody ever thinks they're earning as much money as they probably deserve. Fresh perspectives is interesting. I think it's really good to have a measurement. Gene Tomlin, the legend that Gene Tomlin once taught me, that if it's not measured, it's not managed, and that I've taken that throughout my career. So I think it's really great that we've got some measurement on this. Yeah, I think there's a bit that we haven't really touched on around sort of what you can do where people potentially the financial reward is not as much as people want, and that's around development. We've done a lot of work to put in high potential programs to keep people, to develop them. We know that support to people. That's a lot of work, but it's really important and good to start now. So no major surprises, but really interesting to see how we develop over the next year. I think there'll be a lot of change in the next year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Lee, and we haven't, as you know, talked about all of the elements of this report, and there are pieces that we that are in the report that we've skipped over. So what we've discussed today is only just a snapshot of the full report. Robert, your view?
Yeah, I think I concur with Lee. I would think, in terms of future years, it'd be nice to see that company purpose staying high, financial reward, as Lee said. I'm not sure that'll move fundamentally. Be really nice. The one that'd be really nice to see really move forward, that talent diversity piece, is the one that I think would be great to see that one move forward in the years ahead. Yeah,
good. So we will keep an eye on this. It will get measured again in the next People Agenda survey, as well as the collective data points that we have on a regular basis. So we'll keep you all abreast of how the career health indicators are developing. Just the 7 key takeaways from the report as a whole, and as those that are aware, we've sort of talked about the first 3 ones. The other 4 that were highlighted in the report are the job security, or that job security is a serious concern globally, and that goes back to the sort of post-pandemic, the political unrest, the financial uncertainty, etc., etc. More people are on the move than ever. Data and technology roles. Skills development of employees is not being prioritized. I think the key that I want to sort of share with you here is that there is a lot of stuff that we haven't discussed in this session today, and more information can clearly be found in the report. There are a few questions that are still coming in, and I just want to spend the last 1 or 2 minutes tackling some of those. Ashish, I'm not quite sure where he's from, but how can a temporary organisation like an organising committee tackle the challenge of providing genuine career growth and learning to the employees, given the fast-paced and operational focus of delivering an event? Rob, can you answer that?
Yeah, my personal take on this is probably a bit opposite that. I'd say that anyone who's worked in an organizer committee, I would generally say to them that for every year you spend there, you're probably getting 3 to 5 years faster growth than you would get in a steady state company. And I think the key, but most of that is through on-the-job development and learning. Most people don't recognize it when they're in an organizer committee. It's when they leave, they realize how much they've grown. And I think a big part of this for organizer committee is helping people understand that, capture it, and then market it when they leave. Yeah,
good point. Look, we are fast coming to an end. I think it's fair to say that the People Agenda it's evident through this report that individuals are becoming increasingly selective about their employment opportunities, and the power dynamic is shifting in their favour. And I think that job seekers are now placing greater emphasis on aligning their values with those of the company that they work for. And while compensation and job security are still at the forefront of many people's minds, the way individuals approach work is fundamentally changing, and this trend is likely to continue for years to come. There are other questions. Unfortunately, we can't get through all of them. I would say that, well, I'd like to thank Rob and Lee for your thoughts and your insights into not only where you are now in terms of work, but also your experience, your historic experiences, which have been invaluable. I would like to thank Kat McCready, who unfortunately couldn't make it. Thank you to, or thanks to some debacle on the Great British Railways. And I think it's unfortunate that she wasn't here, because being talent director of an international agency, she would have given a slightly different perspective on the marketplace, rather than what is more a federation / major event perspective. I feel that she put a lot of effort into preparing for this event, but unfortunately didn't quite make the start line. So I want to thank her for her efforts, and everybody else that has actually put in a huge amount of work in putting this people agenda together. I think it is an increasingly valuable tool for HR to help make better decisions, or better informed decisions on their strategy, and helping them with attracting the right talent to grow the industry for themselves, but also for all of us. So I would like to thank everybody again, and you'll receive the report shortly. So thank you very much indeed, everybody.
Thanks, Will. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you soon.